Chapter 38, Epilogue. Epilogue. Baron. Cecil heard the shift of silk, his eyes sliding open moments later as a pair of hands planted themselves on either side of his chest, the spill of golden ringlets tickling his skin and blocking the creeping light of the morning sun. Rosa's flushed face came into view above his, and he arched his back, releasing a satisfying yawn and stretching his arms high in the air before letting them collapse over her shoulders and clamping down to drag her on top of him.
You're up pretty early today. It's time to start getting back to our regular routine,
Rosa smiled, nuzzling her cheek against his bare chest.
Although I do kind of like how my mother's patented guilt trips have kept Theodore in town these past few nights to keep her company. Please don't ever mention your mother in our bed again,
Cecil groaned.
Honestly, Rosa.
Sorry, Rosa laughed, flicking the lobe of his ear.
I've just been so happy these past few days, I think I've completely lost my filter. Probably another good reason why we should be getting back to reality,
Perhaps, Cecil relented, idly stroking her hair as he gazed out the window. The sky was a water-stained mix of pinks and blues, the village below steeped in purple shadows that were slowly giving way to daybreak.
Although Theodore probably won't be here with us much longer, anyway. His squad captain will be insisting that he moves into the same dormitory as the other Red Wings sooner rather than later. It won't look good if Theodore gets special treatment. I don't think he would want special treatment,
Rosa smiled.
I'm sure he's counting down the days until he can move out. Seems like he went from being my baby to becoming a young man overnight. I hope he'll be alright, today,
Cecil said softly, closing his eyes and sinking back into the pillows.
I hope I'll be alright. Cecil.
Rosa lifted herself off of him, gingerly pressing her mouth to his as her fingers trailed down the curve of his jaw. She could feel his muscles shifting tensely beneath her as she pulled back.
You are both strong. And I think you both understand that this is for the best, deep down inside. It's not the same as before. You know. Yes. But, even so. I know, my love. And still. I'm so sorry.
Spirits of the Earth. Troya.
And finally, please continue to bless the bounty of our land, so that we may not only continue to strengthen the hearts and minds of your people, but those all over the world who pray for the sanctity of our planet. Blessed be the crystal.
The Epop leading the morning's prayer rose from her knees, her golden hair ornaments jingling merrily as she lifted her head and gave a subtle nod. The remainder of the Epops climbed to their feet at her cue, and Leonora's head snapped up, her eyes wide as her mitre flopped over her forehead from the sudden movement. She had quite nearly drifted to sleep thanks to the soothing cadence of the Epop's voice. These days, she felt like she could fall asleep anywhere, at any time, without warning. Her body still had not quite recovered from her adventures, even though she had been treated as nothing short of royalty since her return home and hadn't had to deal with any of her usual chores or day-to-day drudgery. Although, that too would soon be coming to an end, the world was making a fierce comeback from its near destruction. It seemed that everyone was anxious to get life back to as close to normal as possible. Leonora had understood before stepping off the lunar whale for what would be the last time that her role in the planet's restoration had only just begun. It was a terrifying notion, knowing that your life and everything you had once cared about had been irrevocably changed forever in the span of what had been a few days, but for some reason, she still couldn't manage to feel afraid, not even a little bit. But even so, this is not the day to fall asleep during prayers, Leonora squirmed, discreetly pushing her hair out of her eyes as she adjusted her collection of hairpins in her hat. Not today, of all days.
I still can't believe the crystal of Earth has returned. And in one piece, no less,
another Epop piped up, admiring the earth-toned jewel as it languidly spun above the dais in the crystal chamber.
With today's executive order, our people can finally concentrate on rebuilding our proud nation,
another Epop said, and the others murmured their agreement. Behind them, a cluster of young women, former candidates for the open Epop post, had come to join them in their prayers that morning in anticipation of today's special announcement. The Epop who had led the prayers turned to Leonora, who had gotten herself straightened out and was waiting patiently with a slight flush staining her cheeks, her hands folded at her waist. Everyone is here to see me, Leonora gulped. Am I making a mistake? The Epop cleared her throat, and the silence that filled the hall became deafening.
Leonora. As of this day, you are to stand officially amongst our ranks. You have proven yourself more than worthy during not only your original trial, but in your efforts to help recover the Crystal of Earth. Not to mention the whole saving the world bit,
another Epop added, and they all shared a giggle, lowering the tension in the room a notch. Leonora blushed deeper as she stared down at her cornflower silk ballet slippers, her heart racing so hard that she was positive everyone in the castle, maybe in all of Troya, could hear.
I. Thank you so much. If I may, however.
She lifted her head, her grey eyes shining with the crystal's luster as she choked out her request. Her voice had fallen so quiet that none of the candidates behind her could understand what she was saying, save for a tall woman in a skin-tight pink gown, her hair swept into a messy ponytail and her ruby-red mouth pressed together in glee as she read Leonora's lips.
Hee hee. What is she asking, Izzy?
Lila whispered from next to her. Before Izzy could reply, the Epop suddenly pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes widening as her sisters began to mutter among themselves.
What?
The Celeste Triad. Mysidia.
There you are.
Palom didn't even blink as his sister swept into the crystal chamber, her sandals clacking noisily as she made her way to the dais and stared at him through the crystal, waiting with bated breath for some kind of acknowledgement. Finally, he lifted his eyes, pushing his hair out of his face and stretching as he forced out a yawn.
What's up?
Porum could hardly contain her excitement, she wasn't even irritated that Palom had taken his sweet time to say anything to her.
The elder wants to see you.
Palom suddenly dropped his arms, his eyes bugging out of his head.
He's woken up. He sure has.
Porum squealed.
Let's go.
She snatched his hand, and he let her drag him out of the crystal chamber and down the stairs to the room the elder had been recovering in on the ground floor of the tower. As soon as Palom rounded the corner, he felt his heart sprout wings and soar out of his chest. The elder was sitting up in bed, sipping from a clay mug as Megan busied herself around him, straightening a cart full of medications, food, and water and occasionally reaching over to fluff his pillow or tug on his sheets. Palom and Porum made their way to his bed, each one of them taking a side as the elder finished his drink, setting the mug on a nearby nightstand. In seconds, Megan had swooped in, scooped it up, and begun to refill.
Palom. You've returned.
The elder smiled, and Palom crossed his arms over his chest, shaking his head.
Elder, what were you thinking? You know you aren't so young anymore. Porum and I have been back for days. And I've been worried sick the whole damn time. Palom.
Porum huffed, and the elder shook his head, chuckling.
It is quite all right, Porum. He only states the truth.
He looked up at her twin brother, his smile fading.
I was wondering, Palom. Now that you've returned from your very successful mission in Troya, have you made a decision about your sage training quite yet?
Palom flushed, turning away and shaking his head as he muttered.
That can come later.
Porum blinked, wondering if she had heard correctly.
Hey.
He shrugged, arching a brow.
Come on. You know as well as I do how helpless Mysidia would be without me. I can't possibly take on such intense training at a time like this.
Who the hell is this imposter? Porum gaped, and the elder clapped his hands together, a riotous laugh escaping from his lungs that quickly dissolved into a rattling cough.
Long have I awaited those words. Drink, elder,
Megan interjected, shoving the mug back into his hands. He took a long swig as Porum tried to get Palom to look at her, his face was streaked with red, and she could swear she saw the tiniest glimmer of water in the corner of his eye. Palom. If training means that much to you, you shouldn't be forced to stay here. I can support the elder, and the other mages will be around to help, too. I can't sit around and watch your dreams die on the vine. You deserve to be happy, brother. You deserve to live your own life.
Elder.
Porum began, but he set the mug down, raising a hand to silence her.
So, with all that said, from this day forward, I leave Mysidia in the hands of you both. Wah!
Palom screamed so loudly that Megan nearly toppled into the medicine cart.
Elder, you couldn't.
Porum cried.
We are yet still unprepared for the job, and I do deign to speak for both of us. She's right,
Palom nodded, scratching his head.
Hey, that's something I never thought I'd say. But in all seriousness, she is right. Thank you, brother,
Porom nodded curtly.
See? Even he agrees.
The elder chuckled, shaking his head.
Oh, you'll be fine. As long as the two of you are together. Black and white. Darkness and light. Male and female. Your differences are exactly why I am sure you will lead us along the right path. You are each other's greatest strengths, and most crippling weaknesses. You will be an unstoppable force that will bring my city a kicking and screaming into the future, I am quite sure. Wait.
Palom leaned over the bed, sticking his nose in the elder's face.
These aren't your last words or anything, are they? Palom.
Porom blanched.
What are you? Ugh.
The elder shoved Palom's face away with his hand, groaning.
You are still a cheeky fool. Back to training with you, you've obviously still got much to learn about decorum. Sure thing,
Palom smiled, standing back up.
Just don't keel over on us yet, elder. Palom.
Porom gasped, but she couldn't help but giggle behind her hand.
Never change, okay? Not planning on it,
Palom grinned.
I've gotten this far being me. Not gonna stop now.
At that moment, Anja stepped into the room, bowing slightly and shoving her straw hat away from her face so that it fell down the back of her neck.
Sir Palom, a visitor from Troya is here. Oh.
Palom blinked, not even bothering to reprimand her for using the formal title he hated so much.
Well, bring him in. She wanted to wait outside,
Anja drawled.
She's by the pond out front.
When Palom and Porom stepped outside into the blinding glare of another sunny summer day, it took a few moments for their eyes to adjust before realizing who their visitor was. Porom squealed and bolted down the hill, waving her hand excitedly.
Leonora.
Leonora turned, lifting a billowing sleeve to shield her eyes from the sun and breaking into a cheerful smile as she waved back.
Porom. Palom. I'm so glad you're actually here. I thought for sure you would already be on another adventure.
The two girls hugged, Porom stepping aside as Palom made his approach. She noticed his gait had slowed considerably once he had seen who was waiting for them. Leonora smiled up at him, oblivious, lifting her arms for a hug and then realizing that he certainly didn't seem to want one, based on the stormy look that was crawling over his face. So, she awkwardly lowered them again, dithered about nervously and finally decided on offering a hand for a nice, chaste handshake. He gave her hand the side eye and pointedly crossed his arms over his chest, shutting that request down in an instant.
If you're looking for me to teach you something, then I'm afraid you're out of luck. You've got everything you need. I understand that,
Leonora said softly, lowering her rejected hand.
So, why'd you come here, then?
Palom tilted his head.
What about the epochs and everything?
Aha! The light came on in Porom's mind. That's right. Leonora seemed pretty anxious to get home once we made it back from the true moon. I'm sure Palom took that to mean she was blowing him off, since he can never not be the center of attention. I bet he didn't even bother to ask her what she was thinking, and just assumed the worst. Typical male. Leonora laughed nervously, rubbing the back of her head.
Actually I gave it all up. Way.
Palom gasped, his jaw dropping. Porom pressed her lips together, trying very hard to use her least mom-like tone.
Why, Leonora? There are lots of epoch trainees in Troya. Most of them much more suited for the post than I am. I realized that while we were on our journey. And it all just sort of solidified once we came back home. I wanted to be sure to sort everything out properly with the epochs before I left. So, what are you gonna do now?
Palom frowned. Leonora gazed up at him, pressing the tips of her fingers together.
I thought I would start on the journey towards becoming a sage. Are you serious?
He choked, and she stepped back, wincing.
What? Is that so strange? Not at all.
Porom interrupted, sliding between a stunned Palom and an uncertain Leonora as she slapped Leonora on the back a little too hard.
I'll give you all the help you need, you'll stay here with us, of course. Really?
Leonora gasped.
I won't be a burden. Of course not.
Porum smiled.
Right, Palom. Right.
Palom shook his head, stunned at how quickly everything was happening.
And not at all. That reminds me.
Leonora smiled, turning away from Palom. He was giving her the strangest half-smile, half-grimace that both titillated and frightened her, and she was grateful to have a legit excuse to ignore him for a moment.
I've been doing some research, I may have found a way to restore your hair. My hair.
Porum blinked, and Leonora nodded, gently taking hold of Porum's ponytail between her fingers.
Yes. On the lunar whale, while I was recovering. Palom told me about how he accidentally turned your hair pink when you were children and how it upset you so much. It just so happens that changing your hair color is quite popular in Troya, all the girls do it, and there are magic spells and items they've concocted for that sole purpose. If you give me some time, I think I could find how to make it match Palom's again. Leonora.
Porum felt her eyes water, and she had to quickly swipe her tears away.
That is one of the sweetest things anyone has ever offered to do for me. But the truth is, I've grown rather attached to my pink hair now. Wah.
Palom gasped.
Since when? You were giving me hell about it up until the day I left for Troya, it felt like. Since we got home, actually.
Porum smiled.
But I'd rather show you than tell you. I'll be right back.
She bolted back up the hill toward the tower, and Leonora and Palom turned to each other, their faces a matching shade of red as they sized each other up.
Well, whatever. Guess I'll be babysitting you a while longer. Why yes.
Leonora squealed.
Although. What? Spit it out already. You keep up that stuttering on the battlefield, and you'll be crushed to dust before you can utter a single spell.
Leonora twisted her ponytail around her fingers, raising her eyes.
And maybe it doesn't have to be babysitting. All the tea time.
Palom blushed deeper, pressing his hand to his mouth.
Leonora. What are you? Here.
Porum exclaimed, leaping between them from seemingly nowhere and brandishing a rectangle-shaped scrap of canvas. Leonora eagerly took it from her, and Palom turned away, taking a quick moment to strategically position the way his jacket fell over his hips.
Oh my!
Leonora cooed as her eyes fell over the delicate strokes of paint.
Look at this cute pregnant woman. She's about to pop. And this handsome man next to her.
She raised her eyebrows, peering over the picture at Palom.
Gosh, he looks a lot like you. Those are our parents,
Porum smiled, pointing to the man next to the pregnant woman.
Our father, and...
She slid her finger over to the pregnant woman, who had a thick crown of cascading pink hair tumbling over her shoulders.
Our mother, when she was pregnant with us. And this man on her other side is the elder when he was young. What?
Palom blinked, snatching the canvas out of Leonora's hands.
Where did you get this? How come I've never seen it before?
He snuck a glance at Leonora.
Also, you think I'm handsome? I was planning on showing it to you soon,
Porum explained as Leonora turned away, her hands flying to her cheeks.
It's just that things have been so crazy since we got home, we've hardly had a quiet minute together. While Megan and Anja were helping clean out some of the elder's things to make his room more comfortable for him, they stumbled upon this and saved it for us. Look at the back.
Palom flipped it over, reading the penciled inscription aloud.
Mysidia, Tower of Prayer, September 1st.
He shook his head.
This is the day before our birthdays,
Porum smiled.
They must have come to the tower for a ceremonial blessing. Maybe they knew we were on the way. Hey.
Palom smiled a little, shaking his head.
You really do look just like her. Does this mean my spell just hurried along? What would have happened anyway? That's hard to say, of course,
Porum shrugged. She didn't want him to feel like he was getting off that easy.
But after seeing this picture, I've decided that I really like having a small part of Mom with me. Wherever she may really be. It reminds me of how far I've come, and how much growing I've yet to do. A good perspective to have,
Leonora sniffled.
Happy endings are just the best. That's not all I brought with me, however.
Porum grinned. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small box and popping it open. Inside were 3 freshly polished silver rings, each adorned with a delicate star that glimmered in the sun.
What are those?
Palom smirked.
More cheapo jewelry? You've got to ask for a raise with your new position. Not as cheap,
Porum laughed.
I wanted to get us rings to replace the ones that the mysterious girl damaged. The shop girl said that these were the last set she had, and she wouldn't break it up. But now, I think it was meant to be.
She pulled all 3 rings out, distributing one to Palom, one to Leonora, and then sliding one onto her own finger.
I love it,
Leonora exclaimed, holding up her hand.
Maybe we could infuse them with some magic and try more twin casting as part of my training. Precisely what I was thinking,
Porum nodded, and Palom huffed, crossing his arms.
Hey now. I'm her teacher. Don't go making up curriculum without me. That can all wait until tomorrow,
Porum smiled, taking Leonora's hand.
Come on, I'll show you around. We can stay in my room until we get a proper bed made up for you, I've got plenty of space. I can't believe you're saying lessons can wait.
Palom gasped.
But, you know, Leonora can stay in my room, too. Porum snores like an ogre. No.
Both the girls shouted, turning to each other at the same time and laughing before disappearing over the hill, Palom scrambling after them. In one of the newly blossoming bushes near the pond, a small frog crept out in the protection of the shade, croaking happily as he watched Porum's ponytail bob away in rhythm with the much more noticeable spring in her step. Good for you, Porum. I hope I'll get to be in class again with you someday. A Clockwork Dream. The Underworld.
Well, I'll be. So that's what the crystals were made for.
Jut scratched his beard.
I'd never believe such a tale if it wasn't coming from you. Yes, father,
Luca nodded.
I didn't even tell you the craziest parts of the story. But we'll save that for another day. It's all over my head, anyway.
Jut shrugged, stepping away from Crystal and taking the stairs 2 at a time down the dais. Luca blinked, stepping out of his way.
What part didn't you get? I could try to explain it again if you like. No, it's not like that. If you ask me, we dwarfs aren't meant to sit around all day, pondering the mysteries of the world. We should keep it simple, you see? And I don't see why we shouldn't protect our crystals the way we always have. I don't think it necessarily matters why they were put here, it's what they are doing for our world now that matters most. Maybe you're right,
Luca smiled.
You could say the same about any one of us, I suppose.
The crystal chamber's door suddenly flew open, a flurry of manic footsteps bouncing in the air as Jot and Luca spun around.
Luca. Mid.
Luca exclaimed, running up to the little boy and swinging him around as he let out a squeal. A few moments later, a robust form filled the doorway, and Sid lumbered in, letting his goggles snap in place over his forehead as he pulled them away from his eyes.
Ah, there you are, Mid, what did I tell you about taking off like that? Sid and Miniature Sid are welcome to roam this castle whenever you please,
Jut beamed, and Mid threw his arms around Luca's neck. Sid sighed, shaking his head.
At this rate, you're going to spoil him rotten. It's bad enough the stuff Cecil lets him get away with in Baron Castle, stuff that would make the former king roll in his grave, may the gods rest his soul. You didn't come here just to complain about how relaxed our normally so very tightly wound Cecil has gotten, did you?
Luca grinned, and Sid guffawed, spitting his pipe out of his mouth and stuffing it into a breast pocket.
Afraid not. My grandson wouldn't stop whining about how much he wanted to see you, so. Oh, Mid.
Luca giggled, bopping him on the nose before setting him down.
Promise you'll never get sick of wanting to see me, unlike some other cretinous boys I know. I promise, of course.
Mid beamed.
You're my favorite, Luca. Well, that's just perfect.
Luca giggled, her heart melting into a pile of sticky goo.
Come, to the Falcon. I've got a job you can help me with. Whoa. What, already?
Sid laughed.
We just got here. Don't you dwarves have high tea, or something? Anything that involves bite-sized cakes? Come on.
Luca laughed, nodding toward Mid, who was anxiously pulling her toward the door.
You can stay for dinner, but you have to help me finish my work, first. In the underworld, a dwarf does not come to the dinner table until he has finished his day's work and helped his comrades finish theirs. Might I remind you that despite my appearance, I am not a dwarf.
Sid inquired, although the flash of his teeth gave away that he was joking. Jut shook his head, watching as Luca and Mid disappeared through the threshold.
This is your fault, you know. If you hadn't awarded her an engineer's license.
Bah, Sid dismissed the thought with a wave of his hand.
There was no awarding about it, she earned it, fair and square. She's an amazing woman, your highness, but I'm telling you something you already know. Yes, yes,
Jut smiled.
I was always terrified that I would never be enough for my little girl. A child needs her mother, especially one growing up in the glare of spotlight that being a royal brings. But I guess I did something right. Although I'd still say Luca did most of the work. She's as headstrong and brilliant as Queen Helene was in the peak of her life. I know if she were here, she would be proud of everything Luca has become. We're all very proud of her,
Sid smiled.
So, does this mean you've given her leave to help with the mission Cecil inquired about? Triple M.
Jut nodded.
As much as it pains me to see her go so soon after just coming home, I know in my heart this is the right thing to do, and of course, she would give me hell anyway if I told her no. I'm learning how to choose my battles, and it's only taken me 21 years. Imagine that.
On the deck of the Falcon, Luca was kneeling over the chamber for the missiles she had first debuted when she had rescued Rydia in front of the entrance to the Feymarch, explaining to Mid what she had encountered with her latest test run just a day prior.
Right now, this is just positioned a little too closely to the engine. If you ready the missile for firing and wait too long, the whole thing overheats and explodes. That's the giant hole there.
Mid asked, pointing to the gaping pit of black and splintered wood next to them, and Luca nodded, grimacing.
Yep. Moving the engine isn't an option right now. It takes up too much space as it is. If I'm going to get that far in, I'll be completely rebuilding it from scratch to be small and more energy efficient. So, I was thinking if I installed a cooling panel, right around here. Oh. Say, that makes good sense.
Sid exclaimed. Luca and Mid turned, peering up at him as he stroked his beard. They had been so engrossed in their work, they hadn't even heard him come aboard.
How did you come up with that?
Luca turned the slender sheet of metal over in her hands.
This was just a little something I picked up while examining the lunar whale's engine. I infused this with the same types of naturally occurring essences I used to give Kalka and Brina their magic powers, but since I didn't want to risk the panel eventually losing its potency, I cheated and asked Rydia if she could get me some diamond dust from Shiva, instead. So far, it's working like a charm. It's as cold as the day I got my hands on it. I would have never thought of that.
Sid shook his head, amazed. Luca frowned, resting her cheek against her palm.
We need to do something about this part here, though.
She demonstrated by attempting to slide the panel in, where it came to a stop halfway.
I've calculated that this is the exact length I need to sufficiently cool the magazine.
But...
How about this?
Mid asked, gently pulling the panel away and reaching to his belt for a screwdriver. After digging around for a few minutes, he stepped back, gesturing for Luca to try again. She slid the panel in place, her eyes lighting up as it slid perfectly inside, resting in its desired location with a satisfying click.
Wow. Mid, that's perfect. Haha. That's my boy.
Sid grinned, and he and Mid exchanged high fives. The stomp of boots on the deck greeted them as Judd appeared over the ramp, a collection of his guards in tow.
If there is anything you need on Cecil's behalf, Sid, do not hesitate to let me know.
Luca stood up, dusting her hands off on her romper and pulling off her visor to drag her palm over her sweaty forehead. It was another blazer in the underworld. Just like any other day.
Well, we could really use some crewmen, actually. They're still working on recruiting all over again for the Red Wings, right? Having our own crew for the mission would be really helpful. Lolly-ho.
One of the guards jumped in the air.
His Majesty is free. Maybe he should come along.
Jut flushed. He was in what he considered a priceless debt to Cecil and the others, once again. Diplomatic protocol would mandate that he should join, even though he really didn't want to leave his kingdom behind for more than a few hours, let alone something that might take weeks, or even months, when all was said and done.
Duh. All right. I'd be happy to help out. Oh, Father, you wouldn't understand anything on this ship.
Luca rolled her eyes.
I was talking about your bodyguards. Let me borrow some of them.
Oh, thank the gods. Jut chuckled. That, he could easily arrange for. There were plenty of dwarves, unlike himself, that shared Lucas' thirst for adventure and exploration.
Nariho!
Another guard exclaimed, popping into the air and doing an odd little half-spin before crashing back into the ramp with a sickening crunch that erupted in the air.
Ah! Ugh! My knees just aren't as good as they used to be.
Maybe not that guy, Luca thought, chewing on her lip. When is he going to finally retire? I seem to see him limping around here more often than walking. The other guards turned to him, shaking their heads.
How many times do we have to tell you? It's Lolly-ho.
On the horizon. Fabul. Dawn's light filtered through the sheer panels of the throne room's windows, puffs of azalea-scented air fanning them outward with a delicate whoosh every couple beats. Sheila swept through in her usual flurry of rustling skirts, giving each monk guarding the throne a wide smile as she made a beeline for the crystal chamber. It was the same routine she had every morning, carried forward from long before she had become queen, rising with the sun, cooking a hearty breakfast for Yang, and later, Ursula, too, and after ensuring that neither her husband or her daughter would slump off back to bed, visiting the crystal chamber solo for her morning prayers. As she made her approach that morning, she caught the snippets of a conversation between the Duke Consort and the Chancellor through the door, which had been left ajar. She cleared her throat nearby as a means of announcing herself, but neither man seemed to hear her. She spied them both gazing at the crystal floating high above, returned to its usual splendor as if the last couple days had been nothing but a bad dream. The Duke Consort pressed his lips together, shaking his head in quiet awe.
The moon is truly gone. And the crystal of wind is safe once more.
The Chancellor turned toward him, crossing his arms.
I wonder, though. Now that we know the crystal's true nature, can things ever truly be the same? Well, what difference does it make?
Sheila asked, pushing the door open and making her way to the crystal dais where just days before, Cain Highwind had held a lance to her throat. The Chancellor and Duke Consort both nodded to her, which was about as much of a formal greeting she would let them get away with on a daily basis. She didn't like being bowed to, being called by any title, or any other insinuation that she was any different than the commoner Sheila of 17 years past. Sheila peered up at the crystal, her heart skipping a beat as she drank it all in. The beauty and grace of their crystal never got old. She swore she could even see a flash of Asila's eyes in the citron glare.
People pray to the crystals because the crystals are always there for them. Even when they are spirited away and taken into the vast reaches of unknown worlds, they still always manage to find their way back home. They are a unifying force. Everyone wants to help protect and take care of them. Makes sense.
The Chancellor nodded.
When you put it that way, nothing's really changed at all. I could not have stated it better,
the Duke Consort chuckled.
Sheila, such eloquence is becoming of you.
She shrugged, letting out a low snort.
No need to compliment me. That's just how my husband put it.
The Chancellor and Duke Consort shot each other a look. Ah, of course.
Speaking of Master Yang, where is he right now?
The Chancellor asked.
Training, of course. With Ursula.
Ursula smiled.
They've been at it for 16 hours a day ever since coming back home. I've seen less of them now than when they were off chasing after that girl and the crystals.
The Duke Consort shook his head.
My. It is strange to think back to when Yang treated Ursula like a rare, fragile jewel. Do you know what changed?
Sheila giggled.
I think my silly husband said it best himself, how can I believe in my people's future if I cannot even believe in my own daughter? Neither of them has filled me in on everything that happened while they were away, but...
She shrugged.
Eventually, they'll get sick enough of each other that talking to me will seem appealing again, at least for a little while. I can be patient. YAAAH. Ugh.
Ursula crashed into the garden wall behind her, clutching her stomach as she flopped over to her side and curled into the fetal position, her vision fading in and out with each ringing footstep that approached her. When she had finally mustered the strength to lift her head, she saw her father standing over her, his hands on his hips and his eyebrows raised.
I told you I was not going to go easy. Why yes, Master.
Ursula gasped, clenching her teeth through the pain as she forced herself to sit up. It felt as if all of her ribs had been rearranged into a jumbled traffic jam of muscle and bone. If she ever fit properly into her clothes again after this, it would surely be a miracle.
Is that the best you can do?
Yang asked calmly, and she shook her head, taking one last punishing breath before leaping back to her feet.
And no, master. I'm not done yet.
Yang smiled, fluidly shifting into his readying stance. Before he could even blink, Asila's foot was flying toward his face, the scuffed and ragged bottom of her slippers the last thing he saw before his legs flew out from under him, the force of her attack sending him into a crashing heap among freshly bloomed, or rather, now, freshly crushed, flowers. Even as the thin drizzle of blood slid down from his nose to his lips, he couldn't help but let out a bellowing laugh. How long had it been since he had made a rookie mistake like that, letting his guard down for even a split second? In the ramparts high above the gardens, Gekao turned away from the fight below, pressing his back to the wall as he drummed his fingers upon his forearm. I suppose Fabul has its own honor to uphold, as well. In the light of the crystal. Damn Cyan. Harley flipped page in her notebook, finishing up the last of the day's observations as her pen flew across the pages, minuscule drops of black ink spraying over her palm while she wrote.
So, the crystal is the same as always.
Indeed, Edward nodded from beside her. She completed her entry with a hurried date and her best estimate of the time. Edward had never kept a clock in his throne room, being someone who did not care much to be frequently reminded of the passage of time, and she had left her watch on the nightstand of her bedroom. She could picture exactly where it was sitting, even though she had not spent much time in there since returning home. Just thinking about why that was made her cheeks ignite with flames, and she became so distracted by the effort to get them back to their normal pallor that she hadn't noticed Edward begun talking again.
I cannot help but think that our crystal is different. Different from all the other crystals the Creator has made.
Hey. Harley blinked.
How so, my lord? Our nation believes in this crystal, yes? But it would have taken more than that for it to recover its light. More than our prayers, too. Are you suggesting that the crystal itself is evolving, too?
Harley widened her eyes.
Is such a theory even probable?
Perhaps. Edward turned to the crystal once more from where they had been standing in the threshold between the crystal chamber and the throne room.
Perhaps it has responded to the evolution we ourselves carry in our hearts. I would like to believe that, anyway.
He smiled sadly, looking up at her.
Do you think that makes me too much of a romantic? Not at all.
Harley shook her head, her fingers flying up to the bridge of her nose out of habit to push back the glasses that were no longer there. She had never realized what a nervous tic that was for her until she no longer had anything to actually fidget with.
There is a place in this world for science, truth, and indisputable fact. But all of those can live side by side with magic, wishes and dreams. In fact, I'd say they complement each other very nicely.
Me too, Edward smiled shyly, extending his hand. Harley lowered her gaze, her breath caught in her throat as she slammed her notebook shut, inching forward to meet him.
Your Majesty.
Harley and Edward both leapt a foot in the air as the Chancellor bounded in, their respective hands flying back to their sides. The Chancellor's cap was flying half off his head as he skidded in front of them and doubled over to catch his breath.
There you are. Ah, and Harley, too. I've been looking all over for both of you.
He peered up at Harley, his face brightening slightly.
I'm still not used to you without glasses. Is that magic spell really working that little girl cast on you? Little girl.
Harley huffed.
You mean Leonora, Troy's newest epopt? Yes. You would best remember her true title the next time you see her,
Harley lectured, wagging her finger.
But, to answer your question, yes, the magic is still working beautifully. She called it a side spell. It was a lifesaver on the way back home from the true moon with my glasses being shattered. I could rather get used to this, I think. And what was it that you were in such a hurry to find us for, Chancellor?
Edward pressed, slightly salty about the interruption. The Chancellor stood up straighter, scratching his head.
Oh dear, I seem to have forgotten already. Ah, wait, it's coming back to me. Have you obtained the material we were discussing earlier? We're due to have it ready by sunset for pickup. Harley.
Edward gestured toward her, and she nodded, tapping her pen against her notebook in lieu of no longer being able to play with her glasses.
Yes, my lord. I have made all the necessary arrangements. Everything and everyone will be in their proper place tonight. As I would expect,
Edward winked, and Harley flushed again, whirling around before the Chancellor could get a good look at her. His gaze bounced between the two of them, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly.
Then, Your Highness.
He bowed quickly, turning to take his leave. Harley started to follow him, calling over her shoulder that she would catch up with Edward later. She needed to get her hands on that darn watch, and had just remembered that she had promised to meet with two promising inventors from Capo about funding their project to mass-produce something called a hover bike. Surely they would be here any moment now if it was as late in the morning as she suspected. And just like that, she had snapped back into serious Harley mode. The sudden transformation always made Edward laugh, especially now that he had been able to see more of her not-so-serious side as of late. Edward gave her a wave in reply, turning to lock up the crystal chamber. Just as he was about to place his signet ring into the hidden depression within the wall, he swore that he saw the shadows of two figures gazing at him from within the crystal's core, twin sets of indigo orbs flickering in the oscillating radiance that bounced off the mirrored chamber walls. Edward pressed his hand to his chest, smiling through the rush of tears that had silently sprung to his eyes. Anna. Tella. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you both. I know now that thanks to the crystal's light, you will always be by my side. Even so, I do look forward to the day we will meet again. I know you understand that I still have a lot to do until then, so please watch over me. And damn Cyan. Just a little while longer. Fade to black. Eblin.
Your Young Highness.
Seneschal bellowed, storming his way into the throne room. The two guards lazing about jolted upward, both snapping their eyes in attention to their impromptu visitor, who hadn't seemed to even notice them. After a few moments of running laps around the room, Seneschal finally paused in front of the throne, huffing for breath.
Okay, I give up. Where is His Young Highness? He left just a moment ago, sir,
the first guardsman said, and Seneschal threw his hands in the air.
What? Again? Where? And why didn't you say something instead of watching me run around like an idiot? You didn't ask,
the guardsman smirked.
And I'm afraid he didn't say where he was going, sir. He simply stated he was going out on patrol and declined an escort. What was that?
Seneschal sighed.
Oh, just when we've almost completed the plans for the first phase of renovating the castle. I fear His Young Highness has fallen into his habit of slipping off unannounced once more. Fallen into?
The second guard questioned as Seneschal bolted back outside.
He never stopped, right?
The other guard shrugged, the door slamming behind the Seneschal so loudly that the paintings of King Edge's late parents rattled on the walls. Edge paused on the steps of Eblin Castle, shoving his hands in his pockets as he whirled around and faced the ramparts above the entryway expectantly. 4 shadows leapt down before him in greeting, each one landing at his feet in an elegant kneeling bow.
Master!
Gekao raised his eyes.
All's clear in Fabul. Nothing seems out of order in the underworld, either,
Zangetsu smiled.
Troy's crystal is the same as always,
Izao giggled.
But I've got some juicy gossip about the Epops.
Tsukinawa was the first to stand, although at his diminutive height, he's still only as tall as the others while they were kneeling.
Nothing unusual to report from Mysidia, either.
He turned to Izao, giving her arm a pinch.
Wonder if your gossip has anything to do with a reunion I saw while I was visiting Mysidia. Oh, I'd bet the farm on it,
Izao winked.
If there is one thing I know best, it's the hearts of men. And women.
Edge's ears perked up. Izao always did get the best dirt, but that would have to wait for later. He cleared his throat, crossing his arms over his chest.
Good work, everyone. And with that, you've completed your final mission from the war effort. You are free to go. Effective immediately, I am disbanding the Eblin 4. Go and live the life you've wished for, that's my last order.
Gekao tilted his head. He had figured something like this would be coming, but he didn't expect Edge to be so blunt and swift about it. He had thought they at least had a few weeks of Edge pretending to be too busy to deal with them before the death knell rang out. Luckily, the 4 of them had discussed such a possible scenario on the Lunar Whale while Edge had been gallivanting with the Creator, and were well prepared with a response.
Then we will continue to serve as your shadows, Master,
Gekao shrugged.
We'll need to come up with a new name if we can no longer go by the Eblin 4,
Zangetsu said thoughtfully, stroking his goatee.
But we'll work on refining that until you next orders come.
The others agreed with him, nodding eagerly.
You've got to be kidding me,
Edge groaned.
I just handed you a get-out-of-jail-free card, and your first choice is really to stay here, serving me? Even after all they... Bullspit, I've put you through.
When no one answered, he spun around to Tsukinawa, pointing a finger accusingly.
You haven't finished your magic studies in my city yet. How are you going to manage that if you're leading a double life? And more importantly, how are you going to get Porum to ever go on a date with you if you're all the way over here? I can study and be a ninja at the same time.
Tsukinawa pouted.
It may mean I'm slow to master magic, but lots of people came into their powers later into their lives, look at King Cecil and Kane Highwind. Besides, I can't ask Porum on a date until I am truly worthy of her. I've got a long way to go before I can even think of such a feat. Does the concept of quality over quantity mean anything to you, Master?
Izayoi tittered.
Tsukinawa's got the right idea. What are you implying?
Edge barked, and then quickly shook his head.
Never mind. Don't answer that. What about you, Izayoi? Don't you think it's time to settle down and catch yourself a man? Excuse me.
Izayoi hissed, lunging for Edge's throat. He fell back, gagging against the twisted folds of his cloak as the others watched on without mercy, not bothering to intervene.
Sorry.
Edge choked.
Should I have said catch yourself a woman instead? It was wrong for me to assume. Idiot.
She screamed.
Why do you never learn to keep that big mouth shut? It's as simple as this, whenever you are imperiled, just call for us. We will be there.
She tossed him back on the ground, watching with satisfaction as he clawed at the cloak tangled all over his head.
We are Evelyn's ninja guard, and we will be that way forevermore.
Tsukinawa leapt into the air, executing a perfect backflip to a smattering of applause from the others.
Don't worry about us cramping your style, Master, I have a feeling you won't be spending much time around here anyway based on how much you've been reportedly sneaking away. We'll watch Evelyn in your place. Out of the mouths of babes,
Zangetsu chuckled, and Edge finally managed to unwrap his cloak, tossing it over his shoulders in a huff and turning away, throwing a dismissive hand in the air as he jumped down the steps.
Whatever, people. Yes, Master.
Gekko waved to Edge's retreating backside.
Thank you for your kind words.
Izayoi smirked. Zangetsu bowed, cringing as a loud snap reverberated from his knees that made the rest of the Evelyn Four jump in place.
I bid you farewell. Until the next mission.
Tsukinawa called, and Izayoi pulled him to her side, kissing the top of his hair with a loud smack. That made Gekko and Zangetsu cackle behind their hands.
Ack. What was that for?
Tsukinawa blushed, squirming against her ironclad grip.
Nothing, you little brat, sometimes you just gotta show someone how much you love them. I have a feeling you're not going to be my pocket-sized baby cousin for much longer. I want to enjoy every last moment I have before you inevitably turn into a miniature Edge. Geez,
Tsukinawa laughed, shoving her away and shaking his head.
Would that really be such a terrible thing, to grow up in the image of one of the greatest kings Evelyn has ever had?
Gekko, Zangetsu, and Izayoi turned to each other, their eyes flashing dangerously.
Yes.
Once you meet her. Missed.
Core.
The little girl waved excitedly as she bolted out of her house, cutting across the lane to Rydia's postage stamp-sized yard. She leapt into the air, snatching 2 low-hanging apples from the tree that was practically weeping with fruit, and skidded to a stop before the turquoise-haired child frozen in the middle of a dirt patch that was to be the future site of a brand-new garden. The child stared at the outstretched offering from the other girl, her luminous amber eyes glimmering with confusion.
What? Don't say what.
The little girl sighed, shoving the apple closer.
You're supposed to say yes. Or maybe even hello, whenever someone calls your name.
Core blinked, finally taking hold of the apple and turning it over in her hands.
Yes. Right,
the girl beamed, plopping down next to her and taking a huge bite, a spray of juices exploding down her chin.
Doesn't that sound better?
Core hesitated, raising the apple to her lips as the little girl's brother spotted the two of them from across the street, where he had just finished shopping for supplies to make lunch. He sauntered over, giving them a wave as he shifted his groceries to one arm, and Core raised her hand slowly, mumbling against the flesh of the apple.
Hello.
Suddenly, a fierce gust of wind shot out behind the boy, nearly knocking him over and sending the shutters into a frenzied clatter on the front of Rydia's house. The little girl and Kor both stared up in wonder as two towering figures stepped out of a slit of light that had torn itself open in the atmosphere over the lane, an elderly man buried under what seemed like hundreds of shabby robes and a striking, statuesque woman that looked as if she could cut glass with her exquisite jawline. The boy whirled around, his groceries crashing to the ground as he fell back in shock.
Ah. Why you?
The little girl gasped. The man and woman shared a bemused look as Kor shook her head, snapping out of her trance and jumping up to bang on the window behind her.
Rydia.
A few moments later, the front door to the house flew open, and Rydia emerged, her hair wild and her hands and chest covered in a fine film of flour.
What is it? If you children really want this cake, you can't keep interrupting.
She trailed off as she took in the two new figures, her jaw dropping to the ground.
It's been quite a while,
the old man chuckled.
I guess up here, I'm more recognizable as my other self, hey? I just thought this form would be less scary to children. Your Majesty.
Rydia balked.
And the Queen. Mist is certainly a fine place, is it not?
Azura cooed, taking a long look around.
Quaint, a lot less magma, too. I'm starting to understand why Kasumi liked it here so much.
Rydia shook her head in disbelief, wiping her dusty hands on her thighs and throwing her arms around Azura, who hugged her back tightly.
I'm glad to see you both in good spirits. But what brings you here so suddenly?
Leviathan shrugged.
Well, we just realized. If you are not able to visit us, then the least we could do was visit you.
He eyed Kor, a twinkle rising in his eye.
I see now why you've been so busy. Who are they?
Kor asked, tugging on Rydia's sleeve. Rydia pulled away from Azura's embrace, taking Kor's hand and pulling her closer.
They? Well, they're my parents, of course. Say hello to them, please.
Kor flushed and peered down at the ground as she mumbled into her chest.
Good afternoon. Hello there.
Leviathan beamed, kneeling down to her height and clasping her other hand in his.
Nice to meet you.
Azura tilted her head, ropes of jewels hanging from her ears clinking together.
She looks quite a bit like you when you were a child, Rydia. I feel as if I've stepped back in time. I hear that a lot,
Rydia giggled. As they talked, Kor's gaze snapped to attention over Leviathan's shoulder, where she spotted a silver-haired figure ensnared in a ruby cloak skulking around the corner of the inn across the way. Her face suddenly exploded into a grin, and she ducked away from Leviathan, waving her arms wildly as she bolted across the street.
Edge.
She howled, and Edge froze in place, his eyes widening as Kor took a flying leap and threw herself at him. He dove forward, catching her in his arms before she could smash face first into the pavement, leaving the safety of the draping shadows of the alley and exposing himself in all his glory in the golden spill of sunlight that had blessed the valley that perfect summer day.
Hey, Kor.
Edge stammered, and she snuggled into his chest, raising her eyes.
You're late. Sorry. Kind of hard to find free time when you've got a country to run.
He gently set her down, looking up sheepishly at Rydia, who was hurriedly trying to brush the rest of the flour off her chest and already blossoming a deep shade of red.
Ah, Master Edge,
Leviathan chuckled.
Nice of you to join us as well. He's the one who suggested we pay you a visit, Rydia.
Azura smiled, and Rydia pressed her lips together, the hammering of her heart reverberating in her ears as a tingly warmth seeped throughout her chest. Caw thump. Caw thump. Caw thump.
We're gonna play all day today.
Kor exclaimed, grabbing Edge's hand and dragging him over to the others.
Sure,
Edge laughed, shaking his head.
No magic, though, okay. Okay. Magic later. Maybe. Kor's a different girl when she's around Edge, hey.
The little girl blinked, and Rydia nodded, giving up on trying to tidy herself from her disastrous attempt at baking and letting her hands fall to her sides. Her lips tugged into a slight smile as she watched Edge and Kor make their approach, the ninja purposely stunting his usual wide, cocky gait to keep pace with Kor's delicate footfalls. Their eyes met across the lane, and before she could stop herself, Rydia slightly lifted her head toward the roof, arching one slender brow. Edge gave a discreet nod, his eyes shining, the same word threatening to tumble from both of their lips. Tonight. Rydia hurriedly turned back to Azura before anyone could notice their secret exchange, jerking her thumb back toward the open doorway of her house.
While you are here, do you know how to make a cake? Kor asked me to bake one. I don't even know how that girl found out there was such a thing as cake. But I've now realized I'm totally over my head.
Azura puckered her perfectly painted lips.
Rydia, you're asking the Queen of the Famarch, the hallowed daughter of the All-Father Bahamut, to help you make a cake. Yes,
Rydia pouted.
You promised you would come to my aid whenever I should have need. And right now, I really need to make a cake, or else Kor is going to think I'm a liar. Well, luckily for you, I am as divine in the kitchen as I am in the battlefield,
Azura sniffed, pushing past Rydia and stomping inside.
Let's see what I have to work with in this cozy establishment.
Rydia sighed in relief, following after Azura as Leviathan sent an explosion of bubble magic across the yard, the kids all laughing and cheering as they started to give chase in a contest to see who could pop the most. Edge scooped Kor up and plopped her onto his shoulders so that she had a height advantage, the Maenad screaming with delight as he clutched her legs and barreled forward. Rydia took one last glance over her shoulder before shutting the door behind her, her throat clenching on a happy sob. Edge. Thank you. A world unwaking. Baron, sometime later.
Ready, Theodore.
Cecil withdrew his sword, a rush of wind blasting through the courtyard that blew his hair and his cape into a frenzy behind him, making him suddenly seem 5 feet taller. Theodore swallowed his trepidation, holding Excalibur in front of him and mentally willing his knees to cease with their shaking.
No training wheels this time, I hope,
he choked, and Cecil gave him a half-smile, raising the light bringer. An errant beam of sunlight reflected off the blade, bouncing into Theodore's eyes and causing them to water. At least, Theodore was pretty sure it was the sun causing that.
Of course not. Ha!
Theodore suddenly cried, diving forward and bringing his blade down upon Cecil's in a dizzying flash of light. Cecil fell back, parrying the blow and feinting left before thrusting forward to meet Theodore's assault head-on.
NGGGH. Not bad, son.
Rosa watched bemusedly from the sidelines, her arms wrapped around herself as Cain joined her, dragging his wrist over his sweaty forehead.
How long have they been going at it? Only just started. I can't have Cecil wearing the boy out on me.
Cain shook his head, marching toward the battlefield and holding up his hand, shouting over the clamor.
That's enough.
Cecil immediately lowered his blade, laughing as he waved to Cain with one hand and handily blocking Theodore's final attack with the other. Theodore bounced backward, his sword clattering to the ground as he landed flat on his rear.
Ow!
He muttered, rubbing his lower back as he looked up at the interloper. His grimace of pain immediately transformed into a delighted grin as he leapt to his feet, grabbing Excalibur and sheathing it promptly.
Cain. You're home. Where have you been? Tying up some loose ends,
Cain said, raising an eyebrow.
But you should know that I'm your squad captain, starting today, and I'll be expecting you to act like it.
Theodore flushed, immediately straightening himself and firing off a salute.
Oh. Why yes, Captain. Welcome home. I'll be counting on you, Cain,
Cecil smiled.
I can't imagine the new Red Wings being in better hands. But please try not to be too rough on him,
Rosa added from behind, her eyes glimmering with a thin sheen of tears.
Oh my gods. I can't believe it. Your first mission is already here. That depends on what Theodore wants,
Cain smirked, crossing his arms across his chest, and Theodore stuck his chest and chin out as far as he could manage without toppling over, shaking his head.
I'll be just fine, Captain. Leave everything to me. Very well, then I'll need less yapping, and more getting your arse on the Enterprise, everyone's waiting to go. Yes, sir.
Theodore cried, frantically turning toward Cecil and Rosa as Cain made his exit. Rosa raised her hand, smiling through her tears as she leaned into Cecil's shoulder.
We'll see you soon, darling, do everything Cain asks of you. It will go fast,
Cecil added.
Sid will keep Cain in line if he gets to be too much. I'll be okay,
Theodore smiled, raising his hand as he started to jog backwards. He could practically feel Kane's glare on him all the way from the shipyard.
Lo. We love you, too.
Rosa exclaimed. Theodore nodded, blushing, and finally turned on his heel to chase after Kane. When the two of them had disappeared out of sight, Rosa peered up beyond the castle walls, her hand shielding her eyes. The moon was hanging in the morning sky like a pearl draped across a stretch of azaleas linen, with not a single cloud in sight.
It's already another full moon,
Rosa murmured.
Time has passed so quickly.
Cecil followed her gaze, sliding his arm around her waist and resting his hand protectively over her abdomen as he pressed his lips to her temple. She closed her eyes, letting herself sink into his embrace.
I wonder how he's doing these days.
Cecil mumbled against her hair, his stare still trained on the moon.
Golbez. Yes.
Mount Ordeals, a few days prior. Cecil, Theodore, Rosa, Kane, and Golbez stood in a semicircle around Cluya's shrine, the mountain air heavy with their collective contemplation as the sun began its descent into the western horizon. Golbez lifted his head, letting out a low sigh as he reluctantly trailed his fingers over the cold, chipped marble. Part of him had expected it to burn to the touch as his blood-stained hands dared to desecrate the sacred stone, but absolutely nothing happened other than a chill running up his spine. So, this is where you've been watching over us since you left this world, Father? I wonder how it was that your soul found this place after you were put to rest? Did your Lunarian intuition know what tragedies were to someday ensnare your family and your people? Alas! That may be a question not even the crystals are able to ever answer. But I'm thankful Cecil was willing to share this place with me before I.
Are you sure you want to go?
Cecil interrupted, and Golbez looked up at his little brother, his mouth twitching from being startled.
I am.
Rosa drew her cape tighter around her shoulders, shivering.
You really do think Fusoya is still alive?
Golbez didn't say anything, merely pressing his lips together. Kane lowered his head as a piercing gale swept through the summit, blowing his hair back from his face. He suddenly wondered how he had possibly managed to spend 17 years in such a lonely, desolate place without going totally insane. Coming back here with Cecil and Rosa by his side only reaffirmed that he never wanted to willingly be without either of them again. Maybe Cecil's father was watching over me this entire time, as well.
Would anyone on that moon still be in one piece, for that matter?
Kane murmured. But Golbez caught wind of his mutterings and shook his head.
I couldn't possibly know. That is why I must go there at once.
He opened his clenched fingers, revealing the sliver of the ninth crystal he had rescued from the Creator before they had made their escape.
But I choose to believe Fusoya is somewhere out there, waiting for me, that all the Lunarians are waiting to be awoken from the Creator's endless nightmare. And if I won't be the one to wake them, who will? Golbez.
Cecil trailed off.
We can.
But Golbez held up his hand, shaking his head.
Cecil. We've discussed this. This is farewell. At least for now. You are needed here. Me? Not so much. Right?
Cecil nodded, swallowing his tears as he extended his hand. Golbez took hold, and they shook on their unspoken promise to someday find each other again. As Golbez stepped away, opening a crackling portal of darkness behind him with the flick of his palm, Theodore suddenly rushed forward, throwing his arms around Golbez's waist. Cecil and Rosa had finally told him everything after much begging, how Zemus had used Golbez's vulnerable Lunarian blood as a child to raise the Blue Planet, and how he, through Golbez, had used that same power to turn their dearest Kane against them, too.
It took me a long time to understood how I felt about it all,
Cecil had explained, his eyes darkened pools even in the spill of the waxing moonlight on the veranda they had hidden themselves away in for the discussion.
In my heart of hearts, I knew none of what happened was either Golbez or Kane's faults, they had not willingly made the choices they did. But then why did I find it so much easier to forgive Kane than to forgive my own brother, my very own blood? Did you ever find out why?
Theodore had asked quietly, and Cecil clasped his head with his hands, taking a long, shaking breath.
It was easier. Easier to accept that everything that had happened to Kane had been just a series of unfortunate events, a run of bad luck. Either one of us could have been the one Golbez found in the rubble of the Misty Valley that day. It was the toss of a coin, as fate so often is, and Cain was on the losing side. But with Golbez...
Cecil pushed his fingers through his hair.
It felt like everything tied back to me. Our mother, your grandmother, Cecilia, died giving birth to me. If I hadn't made us orphans, would Golbez have succumbed to Zemus's darkness, or would have Cecilia been able to save him? It was a question that tortured me for many years, and one that I knew I would never gain the answer to, because I could not turn back time.
He shook his head, resting his hands on Theodore's shoulders and squeezing tightly.
The last time I saw Golbez, before he went to sleep on the Red Moon, he told me that I had our mother's eyes. And to know that was what he saw every time he looked at me. The hatred I had once held for my brother, I turned upon myself. It was no wonder the Maenad was able to revive my past self, using the darkness that even a paladin's light could not vanquish.
Then I will be the one to stop the tragedies of our family's past from repeating ever again, Theodore thought, clinging tighter to Golbez and silently daring him to pull away. Just like the crystals and all living things on our planet. Our hearts must too evolve if we are to inherit the future we've fought so dearly for. Golbez stared down at the boy, bewildered, and Theodore met his gaze, tears stinging the corners of his eyes.
May we meet again, Uncle Golbez. Theodore.
Cecil reached for his son, but Theodore let go of Golbez on his own, taking a step back and wiping his eyes.
Someday, somewhere. That's all I'm asking.
The hardened glare of Golbez's eyes crumbled as he broke out into a pained, yet glowing smile, turning toward the portal and glancing over his shoulder one last time before raising his hand.
Theodore. Thank you.
And before another word could be said, or another breath taken, he was gone, swallowed by the collapsing fold of magic before them. A beam of light launched into the sky, shooting across the western horizon where the lunar whale had descended to their planet for what would be the final time. Current day. Luca waved to Theodore as he climbed aboard the Enterprise, and he gave her a shy wave back, his eyes glued on the back of Cain's head the entire time, lest he suddenly turn around and catch Theodore screwing around. Luca giggled behind her hand, motioning to Theodore that they would catch up later, and turned back, the extensive pile of blueprints spread open in front of her, scratching her head.
Master Sid. Do you really think this is in the Red Wing's best interests? Not upgrading our airships one bit. We have a royal decree, Luca,
Sid smiled.
We are to disarm our airships and never rearm them again. Cecil specifically asked for your assistance to make sure we got everything just perfect.
Luca shook her head, shrugging.
It seems like such a waste. But that certainly sounds like a rule that Cecil would come up with. And if that's what he wants, I'll certainly do whatever it takes to make it happen. Just remember, we have to keep the ships running as we make the upgrades.
Sid winked, and turned to Cain, who had approached the two of them with a small smile. He had been secretly thrilled that Cecil wanted Sid to join them on the inaugural voyage of their new mission as the head engineer that would not only keep their fleet in shape in the time they were gone but would also be providing mechanical assistance to the other nations they would visit along the way. With as much as Cain had missed Cecil and Rosa, there had been so much he still needed to catch up about with Sid, as well. The man had practically been a second father to him, after all.
We're ready to go whenever you are, Captain.
Sid grinned, and Cain nodded.
Good. Please prepare the crew for takeoff. Aye aye. Our destination, Captain?
Theodore asked, and Cain turned to him, resting his hand on his hip.
Ah, Cecil didn't tell you yet? All around the world. We're off on a reconstruction support mission to every nation in the land. There's a lot of damage to undo thanks to the True Moon and Baron, and Cecil wants to make sure Baron is, in turn, part of every forthgoing recovery effort. Really, Captain?
Theodore exclaimed. Whoa. Father is trusting a critical mission like this to someone like me. And all around the world, too. That might mean we'll stop at Fabul, maybe in time for Ursula's birthday? He felt a blush crawl up his cheeks. Wonder if she'll still be wearing the headband. Cain smirked, shaking his head when he saw the goofy look that took over Theodore's face.
Does this look like a pleasure cruise to you, Theodore? Did Biggs and Wedge teach you nothing?
Theodore jumped out of his burgeoning fantasies, raising his hands.
I'm sorry, sir.
Luca cleared her throat in an effort to rescue Theodore, and Kane spun around to face her.
Where are we headed first? Damn Cyan. Edwards procured some building material for us. Roger.
Luca nodded, bundling up the blueprints and sauntering off to assist Sid with takeoff. Kane turned his attentions back to Theodore and couldn't help but crack a smile when he saw the excitement that was still alit in the boy's eyes. Cecil. Thank you for trusting me with your most precious treasure. Yet again.
Off we go, Theodore.
Kane winked to show there were no hard feelings, and Theodore raised a salute, pressing his ankles together.
Yes, Captain.
It was the 15th day of his 15th summer, and Theodore Harvey had never been more convinced that he was very blessed indeed. The end. Author's note: thank you to all my faithful readers who stuck around to see how FF5e ended. According to Square, at least, I am being honest if I say much of it would not have happened this way if I had written the original scenario. Special thanks to G for being my #1 fan, Sarah for writing reviews that make me simultaneously blush and gasp at her excitement, Flynn Drake for kind and encouraging PMS, and lots more. Please send me a PM or leave a review on what you would like to see next. I have a few ideas rolling around in my head to kick off summer with a bang, but would love to hear what others are thinking. Finally, I'd like to dedicate this chapter to my very own Harley, my beautiful guinea pig who crossed the Rainbow Bridge unexpectedly Thursday night, coincidentally the same night I finished Harley and Edward's epilogue, but there are no coincidences in this world, are there? I hope you are having fun on the moon with Ibiki. I will always think of you when I think of FF5e. Rest well, sweet baby. CC, April 21st, 18. End of chapter. End of book. This is a random audiobook appeared signing off.